Maybe it's just me, but something I'm noticing more and more this year as I look at local roads and car parks is that colour cars are back. Stats are starting to back this up. SMMT reported that in 2024, blue just started its long march back to the top, and green and yellow perked up in sales, albeit from a very low base, though colours were still very much on the outs overall. But with 2025 data still to come out, I've noticed not just these classic paint choices, but some of the colours once thought endangered: orange, turquoise, even cream, which the UK Driving Authority once declared nearly extinct after just 9 cream vehicle registrations were registered in 2024. In a sea of grayscale colour choices, it feels like a rainbow is starting to shine through. Grey is still hanging in there. Millennial grey, as it's apparently being called in the context of home decor, where clean, neutral greys have been the shades of choice for a long time. But in November 2025, Good Housekeeping magazine announced, "We talked to several decorators, and one thing is clear: the outdated paint colour designers hate most is grey." Along with minimalism, grey interiors became trendy in recent years, but now designers are guiding homeowners towards bolder, brighter colours that make a space feel more personal. Think moody blues, cheery yellows, and dramatic reds. And into this sea of vibrant new colour, we have the Nintendo Switch 2. Once upon a time, Nintendo was almost synonymous with offbeat coloured consoles. Who can forget the GameCube or their many and varied colours of N64? Their handheld consoles pushed it even further, with a vast array of colourful variants, and of course, even though the original Switch did have its grey edition, it also swung from the fences with neon red and neon blue Joycon, following up in its first year with a selection of other crazy colours: Arms yellow and dark blue, and Splatoon 2 pink and green, to say nothing of a plethora of pastels, Mario shades, and others over the years. And in 2025, into the mix we had the Switch 2, whose tiny hints of highlighted colours literally disappear in a snap when you connect the Joy-Con to the machine. Sleek and beautiful as the system no doubt is, to look at, it's a thundercloud in a box, except for the tiny little circles of colour at off-kilter angles, which slightly remind me of the Mekon in Xenoblade. Why, oh why, Nintendo, did you go down this route? Well, Nintendo's aim is to sell and sell big, and they've certainly understood their audience, judging from the early numbers. This is a far cry from 2001, where Nintendo's parent Kaplan recalled with dismay how proposed colours for the GameCube included what are described as poopy brown and a urine-like tone. Nintendo of America pushed then for black and silver. Nintendo went with purple. By the time the Wii and Wii U launched, Nintendo had learned their lesson. Shigeru Miyamoto explained the transition as follows: "Based on my background as an industrial designer at Nintendo and my background in creating entertainment, I've always wanted to make greater use of color in our hardware," said Miyamoto. If you look back on things like the Famicom and the original Super Nintendo, they were a lot more colorful from a hardware perspective. What we found over the years when we included a lot of different colors in our hardware is people would kind of point to that and use it to paint us as more kid-oriented. So really, what we looked at is what are some ways from a design perspective that we can make the system appeal to all ages. One of the ways that we found to best do that is to minimize the use of color. In that process, we asked, if we're going to do that, what's the best way to go? We found that rather than going all black, all white seemed to have a broad appeal to people. End quote. In some ways, it's even more important today than during the 2000s that Nintendo chooses its colors carefully. Remember that unlike Switch in recent years, Switch 2 is designed to be essentially a new home system, albeit one that can switch to being portable as well. Their recent corporate messaging makes clear that they're putting the family back in their focus as the primary audience for their efforts, and that's because having a family home with the Nintendo Switch 2 under the television gives them the broadest reach. They always wanted their platforms to be not just individual game experiences, but communal experiences that offer connection and fun. Well, if you're a parent and your interior decor is chiefly monochrome, putting a system with neon highlights at the heart of it becomes more of a fashion statement than some may want, and it would be easier for a garish device to be relegated to a bedroom or other less prominent spot in the house, or perhaps even not plugged in at all. Black is safer, more adaptable, more saleable to the greater number of people, and allows Nintendo to crank up their output of Switch 2 systems to the current prodigious numbers, where even at the time of writing, they have surpassed 10 million in sales. But that's not to say that color can be counted out. There are three potential sources of future color for Nintendo: the Joy-Con, the dock, and the machine itself. The most obvious first place for a change-up would be the Joy-Con. Selling an array of colourful Joy-Con has been a big focus for Switch over the years. In 2024, under the advertising banner, Your Switch, Your Style, they promoted the capacity to customize the Switch. But note the focus of this advertising: Your Switch, Your Style. Or, as they say in the blurb, let your inner sports start out in your living room. Bring your Nintendo Switch with you, settling in for some solo gaming sessions. Everything has its season, and there will be a season for Joy-Con Mania on Switch 2, but right now it's not about individual play for Nintendo, but about building Switch 2 up as the hub of the home. Of course, many people will be buying individual systems, and if Nintendo are to come close to the Switch's sales numbers, let alone to match or exceed them, they will need lots of people to have individual machines. But it's not just the higher price point that makes me feel the company are more concerned with the home experience right now. With Mario Kart World and Super Mario Party Jamboree in particular, and through the promotion of Game Chat, they're focusing on this machine as a communal experience to a large degree. Now, it's true that they didn't wait in 2017, but 2017 was a different situation. From a standing start in the doldrums of the Wii U era, the Switch did well out of the gate, its early success tempered mainly by supply constraints, but they didn't have an enormous amount of actual content to shift on the new hardware. In the 6 months after launch, Switch had exactly 3 retail releases, and one of them was a port of their biggest selling title from their prior console. Third-party support was also pretty thin on the ground. Under these circumstances, making the most of every sale by touting colourful accessories was a bit of a lifeline for Nintendo. Even if only a small proportion of people picked up the pink and green Splatoon 2 Joy-Con, it was a boost when Nintendo most needed it, and they knew that in the future they would have a goodly supply of Joy-Con that they could still continue to sell. Now, though, Nintendo isn't short of stuff to sell. Not just new Switch 2 games and premium accessories like the camera, but they also have a library of games Dante's Ninth Circle deep. They don't need to rest on literally superficial gimmicks to make bank. There may be a further complicating factor, which is the uncertainty around the Switch 2's launch around the tariffs. With Nintendo needing to think more carefully than perhaps they have had to in recent years about which country's manufacturing output is routed to which destinations, their priority is surely to have maximum flexibility during times of uncertainty. We know that they routed a large number of consoles to the USA long before the launch of the system, a prophylactic measure which probably helped them to have a goodly supply of American consoles to shift early on. They also have prioritized consistent supply across the board, and while there have been some shortages, notably in Japan, the general trend has been strong and consistent supply to meet high and resilient demand. Under these circumstances, having too many distinctive stock-keeping units of product is potentially not just problematic, but potentially unwelcome. What if you oversupply the model that turns out to be less popular? What if the variant you want comes from a location that is tariffed more heavily and you have to change courses? It's not that repainting these Joy-Con or even the systems themselves is likely to be vastly time-consuming, but it does require thought and a change to what are likely to be highly efficient, highly optimized processes, and at this point, it must be very far down Nintendo's priority lists. And partly they know that people will still have many old Joy-Con which can be used for most purposes on Switch 2 and which can still be purchased. Stock management is a vital consideration for Nintendo in winding down an old console. While having a backup supply of Joy-Con long after the Switch fades into obscurity might be a sensible measure given the problem of stick drift that the original Switch demonstrated and the potential need to continue fixing or replacing Joy-Con for a long time to come, they don't want to be inundated with stock that they can't shift. A low-key release in 2024 was a charger for the Joy-Con so that families could have a selection of Joy-Con to be used, and leveraging this existing infrastructure to make Switch 2 an even more natural slot into the home is only sensible. If people have lots of different Joy-Con, then they can join in with Switch 2 games as well as Switch games, especially for titles like Super Mario Party Jamboree. Promoting too hard the fact that these new Joy-Con are different might actually become a point of friction as much as a sales point. Still, once the first holiday season is done with, things might start to look quite different. After two holiday season-sized sales rushes in a 7-month period, they can expect a brief lull in the new year, and this may give them the time they need to make any changes they require in their production processes, including potentially launching a new type of paint job. With the Mario movie coming out, they will doubtless get a boost in attention mid-year, but it's really the holiday season where they might want to start thinking about Mario and Pokemon-themed consoles especially. At this point, having Mario Red or Pokemon Yellow accessories might be a way to maximize the impact of what are likely to be some of the biggest titles of the Switch 2's early life in Gen 10 Pokemon and the next 3D Mario, whenever precisely they drop. As well as red and yellow, there's the potential for green, with a Zelda machine in 2027 slipstreaming that series' new movie, and before you know it, the original Switch 2 could easily have a selection of different color types available that are tasteful but vibrant, that would sit under the television not as a sore thumb, but as a complement to the post-millennial grey home space. As for offering a full range of adjustable Joy-Con, well, that's something for individual customization, and while I'm sure there will be a few variants out there, a larger range might wait until 2027 or 2028 to fully establish. One possibility is that they may decide to start with variants that are more subtle, consistent with the more subtle use of color on the machine itself. If instead of blue and orange they offered a version of the console with lilac and green highlights, it would offer a tiny bit more customization. That said, I'm not convinced we'll see many such options, not just because it would be too subtle a change, but because they're clearly trying to establish blue and orange as the default colors. One difficulty that people have pointed out is that unlike the original Switch, the actual core machine itself has the system colors built in, and so clipping in alternative colored Joy-Cons would look rather strange. While this is an issue, I can only assume that they decided that clarity was the most important thing early on, especially as they were promoting their new magnetic locking system, which had the potential to confuse some players. Remember, they want this machine to be picked up by the very old and the very young, so it needed to be eminently self-explanatory. If the color coding becomes a familiar part of the system, so that people generally know from seeing these machines in different locations that there's a blue side and an orange side, it's possible that they could then start to plug in other Joy-Con. Perhaps new color Joy-Con could have a tiny accent color that's orange or blue to help indicate which side is which, even if the bulk of the Joy-Con are of a completely different color. But if Nintendo start releasing Switch 2 base models which lack the color coding on the system itself, the color system loses the benefit it originally had because there will be no consistent way to communicate through color which side is which. Sure, they have the plus and minus, but it feels like an odd move to make color vital to their design choices and then abandon this after a year or so. For this reason, I'd suspect that they're more likely to change the black and, if anything, keep orange and blue as accent colors, at least somewhere on the Joy-Con, as an accessibility aid. On this channel, I like to try and give each forecast a numerical value for posterity. This is just a percentage representation of how likely I think something is, but it also allows me to review my accuracy over time and hopefully sharpen my judgment. For example, in summer 2024, I forecast a 70% chance that red would be the standard feature of Switch 2 game packaging designs, and a 90% chance that the next console would be predominantly either white, grey or black. I also thought it 50% likely that colour buttons could make a comeback. Of course, we did have colour highlights to the analog sticks, which technically are also buttons, but I don't think this really counted. At this point, I think it's 90% likely that we will see at least one new Switch 2 dressing by the end of 2026. There will surely be enough big games that bespoke systems can be reliably shifted, and Switch 2 is selling well enough that they can have multiple runs at once. I'd say it's only 70% likely, though, that we will see Joy-Con color variants sold separately by the end of 2026. For the reasons I've stated, while this is an obvious next step, I also don't think they either need or want to rush into having 1,000 different versions of these Joy-Cons on the market, and given the cost of the system, I don't think the market would necessarily be all that receptive, at least compared to the Switch. Having said that, because of the huge install base that the Switch 2 is establishing already, the likelihood of this being able to sell increases all the more over time. As for colours, I think it's 50% likely that we will see either Mario Red, Zelda Green, or some kind of yellow on a console or Joy-Con by the end of 2027, given that these are the Mario, Zelda, and Pokemon colours. But what colours are you desperate to see? Do let me know in the comments, and please check out the videos on screen or the Patreon link below for early, ad-free, and exclusive content. Thanks so much for watching as ever, and I shall see you next time for another Nintendo Forecast.